All right, guys. Looks like it's up and running. It is 6 o'clock on the 12th, as promised. Give it a couple minutes for some people to come on. All right, guys, let me know if it's going through. Anybody that's on here, just let me know that you can hear me and everything's uh, coming through okay. All right, Lisa. All good, good. Rosella, good to see you. Bob, thanks for being on, everybody. Okay. Yeah, don't be afraid to type something in, guys. I'm sitting in front of this computer. I have no idea who's out there, if anybody's there, which I'd do it anyway, but it's good to know you're out there and at least that you can hear the audio. All right. Let's let's begin. I'm trying not to uh oh, okay. All right, Bill, I got that. Thanks, man. So let's start. We're going to be, of course, we're in Hebrews, and we're going to be in chapter 2 and pick up basically directly where we stopped the last time. I don't want to get lost in attempting a recap too much and go back to that previous lesson. But I do want to read the verses again, just so we'll know where we are. So in Hebrews chapter 2, starting in verse 5. For it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, speaking of the age that is the new covenant age, that dispensation of which we are speaking, this age that is the age that remains in the Son, embodied in Him. If we go back to the previous chapter, it's the taking away of one dispensation, one administration, the condemnation, the arrival, establishment, the raising up, the bringing about. Regardless of how you say it, it's said in different ways throughout the Scripture. But we're talking about two ages, two dispensations. So this dispensation is not subjected to the angels. It has been testified somewhere, what is man? That you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man, that you care for him. You made for him a little while lower than the angels, or made him for a little while lower than the angels, sorry. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Now, in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, however, I add the however, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for every man. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering, or make him to be their perfect sacrifice, or the suffering is the sacrifice that brings about a perfect salvation. This phrase, but we see Jesus, I want us to focus on that a lot tonight. We ended the last lesson basically just getting to it, but I want to focus on it somewhat. I'm trying not to be too long tonight. I went a little too long last time, I admit, but I want us to at least consider this phrase as much as we can tonight. Look at this sentence. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we see him. We see Jesus. King James would say, other translations would say, properly so, we see Jesus. What is that talking about? A lot of people have ideas that shouldn't shock us, brings us into view again. They'll say it's not, but it does. They consider this phrase to be corrective. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but what I'm seeing here is we do not see it here, but we see it here. This man that was given dominion first, nothing is visibly, we can look at him and see that this is total failure. None of this has come to pass here. But we see Jesus. And in the one that we're seeing, in the Jesus we're beholding, we are seeing everything intended here realized. Why? Because it was never meant to be realized in the first. It was never meant to be realized in the man of flesh, in the first man. See, if we're going to talk about a changing of dispensations, a changing of ages and administrations, we have to settle this matter first. Who's the man? Who's the man to whom this new thing, this new age is in subjection to? Who has who's sovereignly ruling this dispensation? That's the one we must behold. That's the one we must see. That's the one our souls must recognize. Not so that we can, as some would suppose, so that we can see him until we become like him. Not corrective, not something that fixes our insufficiencies and makes the first finally, through the agency of Jesus, what we were intended to be. No, we're seeing the one God always intended. It was never to be found here. It was to be found in another man. It was to be found in Christ. And it's important that we understand that. It's important that we realize. I mean, this has everything to do again with looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher, the one who originated the thought of it and the one who consummates the reality of it, who brings it about fully, completely as God intended. It's important we see this, or else we will believe. Here's how we left it the last time. A couple of quotes. A couple of quotes from Andrew Murray. And I have Andrew Murray books here. I've read some of his stuff. I don't read them now, but I have read them in the past. But what he writes here is just totally wrong. But it's not uncommon for Christian teaching. It is the type of teaching that uses things like this to motivate Christians to live more devoted lives, more pursuant lives, or more pursuant of spiritual things. It's the same that we've done with the verse, he he must increase, I must decrease. We've done the same with that. We've made it a motivational verse to say, see, we must have his increase in us, and then everything in us that we don't like, or God doesn't like, or that is incompatible to a spiritual life will be removed as he increases and grows up into us, or grows up in us. There's that concept of him getting bigger and bigger, and in his bigness displaces us. You are dead. I believe we have been displaced. Not I, but Christ. And that's what this phrase reminds me of when it says we do not see it here, but we see Jesus. That's not man, but Christ. Not I, but him. That's the reality that governs this age, this world, this creation, this new heaven and new earth that God has brought about in his Son. So Andrew Murray writes this. The epistle points out how this promise, though not yet true of man, has received its fulfillment in Jesus. Now that's good. He uses the word yet, though. We know something bad's coming. He admits that it's fulfilled in Jesus, but he doesn't stop there. That's the problem. We don't stop at the stopping point. God stops there. We wanted to continue on so that it can include us, and not include us as the grace of God has included us, being found in that man, having nothing of our own. We want it to include us in a very significant way, that in us you will also observe what God observes in Jesus. I don't know if that's his intent, but that's sure what he's saying. And that's a dangerous concept, and it keeps men bound to themselves, and thinks God and causes men to think that that's where God's bound to, that God's stuck there too. No, God's finished right there. He's fulfilled in Jesus. Amen. Now, he goes on, now we see not yet all things subjected to man, but we see Jesus crowned with glory and honor. What was true of man in promise, we see fulfilled in Jesus. Listen to this. What we see in Jesus will be made true of man. Not surprised, not shocking. Dead wrong. Obscenely wrong. Again, but we see Jesus is not corrective for us. It is the view of the soul to behold God's accomplishment in spite of us, God's accomplishment that he would provide to us in his mercy and in his grace. It is not corrective so that we can one day measure up to Jesus or be similar in character and morality than Jesus, or have the same standing before God that Jesus has. So the world can see me, and in seeing me, see him. That's what we're after, or that's what most Christianity is after. And so they tell you to pursue that end instead of the end that he first said. God has fulfilled this in Jesus. He goes on, how gloriously we see that destiny fulfilled in Jesus. Again, he says it again. It was because man had become or had been created with a nature capable of such a destiny that the Son of God could become man and not count it unworthy of his divine glory himself to work out that destiny. Okay, man was designed and given capacity to be filled with, not to become, to partake of, not to become. That's why eat that tree. You have to partake of a life outside of yourself for this to be done. I'm providing to you a life outside of yourself. I'm giving you something to partake of and digest and eat that is not of you, that is outside of you, and it is good to eat, and I'm giving you permission. It's freely yours. It's graced to you. We want that which makes us like him, which makes us like God, know what God knows or do what God does. What would Jesus do? I'll tell you. I'll show you. I'll demonstrate it. That's what we're after. And as innocent of an idea that that may be in the hearts of many, it is an absolute atrocity when we're trying to apply that to our daily living, because all you're going to do is fail, because you cannot be Jesus. Jesus is already Jesus in you. That's the whole point. We need to comprehend and give our full attention to the Jesus who has wrought in us what we cannot do, who abides in us as the man, as the life, as the righteousness fulfilled that God always intended. This is in Jesus, not in us, but is realized in the Jesus who abides in us. That's the grace of God here that has been provided. So he goes on. So he works that destiny out. He came and proved. Now I said this the last class, I believe. Here's the false concept of the kenosis of Jesus, or the self-emptying, where he became man. Nothing wrong with the kenosis. Is how people interpret it, what they think it means. Because he came as a man. He came as an example. I have a book over here somewhere, maybe back here. It's called Jesus, the Pattern Son. I remember reading that book in the very late 80s, when I was first being introduced to the kingdom sonship type teaching. And basically, that book uses Jesus as a pattern for us. He's a sign, that where the scripture says that Jesus would be a sign to the Gentiles, a sign used. Well, he takes that literally, or he uses it as a metaphor and says, a sign is something that points you to the destination, not the destination. That's what he just said. That's what Andrew Murray just said in these words I've quoted you. Jesus is not the destination. He's the means to point us. He is the pointer to our destination. He's our sign. He's our example. He's the pattern we live by. And that was the whole point. That Jesus was, a pattern of a greater thing that was going to arrive, and that greater thing is his church, his body. Isn't that something? And it gets worse from there. That's just the premise of the book. It gets worse. from there. Jesus is nothing but a means. He's nothing but a sign to guide us to our proper destination, which is what? Equality with Jesus. He came and proved. This is the problem. This is what he's saying here. I didn't read it. He came and proved what the life of man was meant to be. How humility and subjection to God was the sure path to glory and honor. See, he shows us the example to live by. Humility and subjection to God is the true path to glory and honor. He received glory and honor because he was crucified. And in so doing, he fulfilled the will of the Father as only he could. He didn't come as a mere man. He came as God incarnate, describing and fully expounding God in his fullness, God in his nature. Even the Son, right, has expounded him, has declared him. That's what the word exegesis, or the full expounding and explanation of him. God in Christ was reconciling the world to himself. Sorry, you and I cannot use that as an example. That's pretty well exclusive to Jesus, as everything is. Righteousness is also exclusive to Jesus. Fellowship with God is also exclusive to Jesus. The mercy given to us, the love manifested toward us, is that he gives to us his own fellowship, his own righteousness. By doing what? Abiding in us. His presence performs in us what we can't perform. His presence provides every divine reality that religion tells you that's your pursuit. Go after that. Go get that. Why? Because we got to make this man like this one. It's not about comparison. It's about consummation. It's a superseding in this man everything God testified of here in this one. Because Adam is called, the what is it? What's the word? Yeah. Well, the English Standard says who was a type of the one who was to come. That's what he was. He was a testimony, a type. Given dominion, all of that. But that is only realized fully in Christ. So the comments that Andrew Murray makes are indicative of a self-centered view of salvation. The whole point of this letter is that Jesus has come as the end of all things, as the summarizing of all things of the previous dispensation. That includes man. He's better. He's greater. He's better and greater than all that has been put away and put aside. God has reached his climax in this man. God has reached his full intention in this man. It's not about the betterment of men through Jesus, but Jesus, the great high priest, the man who abides in the presence of God for all of us. This is why the sum is that he is seated, exalted, and throned on the right hand of God. Another commentary, I don't know if I read this one in the last lesson. It says he proceeds, excuse me, he proceeds to admit, this is from Alexander McLaurin, he's a commentary author. He proceeds to admit that as a matter of fact, men are not what David describes them as being, but the psalm is not therefore an exaggeration, nor dream, nor mere ideal of the imagination. True, as a matter of fact, men are not all this, But as a matter of fact, Jesus Christ is. Good. It should end there. And in his possession of all that the Son painted, our possession is commenced and certified. Okay, if we receive it in him, I agree. This is an ideal picture, but it is realized in Jesus. And having been so in him, we have ground to believe that it will be so in us. Sorry, wrong answer. Should have stopped while you were ahead. You were pretty good. I mean, in him being who he is, he fulfills this. This is realized in Jesus. It is an ideal picture realized in Jesus. But that ideal picture doesn't expand to include me as just as ideal, right? As just as perfect. So that now I have hope because he did it, I can do it too. Since it's realized in him, I now have ground to believe that it will be so in me as well. We see not yet all things put under man, alas, I'm reading here, but we see Jesus crowned with glory and honor. And as he tasted death for every man, so in his exaltation, he is the prophecy and the pledge that the grand old words shall one day be fulfilled in all their height and depth. I wonder what fulfillment he's talking about that's going to come one day when these grand old words of a man with full dimension, glorified by the Father, fulfilling God's intent for man. I wonder when that's going to come about. Well, if you keep on reading, it's going to come about when it's mirrored in us, when it's reflected in us, when we, as he said, as we have this ground now to believe, will be so in us too. Guys, I'm lingering here, not to bore you to tears, but to get us to think. This whole thing is about Jesus is better. And the first thing we better get in our mind is he's better than me. That's the first hurdle that has to be jumped. He's better than man, because man is not. But he is. The grace of God is that he is in us who believe. This is the work of the high priest. Going into the holiest of all, in the sight, before the presence of the God of the universe, holy and righteous, that he may stand there, accepted, and be in the midst of a congregation that is a bunch of hard-hearted, stiff-necked people. He would stand there holy before God, and in so doing secure in the sight of God what they, if they were to stand there independently, could never secure. That's why we see Jesus. You could say, we don't see Moses, we see Jesus. That's coming up. We don't see Melchizedek, we see Jesus. We don't see sacrifices, we see Jesus. You could do that throughout this letter. So this whole we see Jesus is not a means that Jesus, again, helps us reach our destiny. He's the predestined place, the predetermined man in whom all men were intended to be found and known and made holy and complete. Outside of that man, there is no fulfillment. There is no dominion. There is nothing. And God designed it that way. But we see Jesus is not a means for us to arrive at the same condition as him, but to recognize him as the one who fulfills the intention of God. See, it's not the behold it and become it theology, right? You become what you behold. I've heard that 1,000 times. You don't see in Christ, when we're talking about seeing Jesus and we're talking about beholding the Lord in the way we do, as far as the revelation of Jesus Christ in the soul, we're not talking about beholding to become. We're talking about beholding what God has done. We're talking about beholding the one who is made unto us what we can't become. See, that's grace. It's the receiving of the one who is made unto us all things, and beholding him, and our soul recognizing and giving our fixed gaze and full attention on his face, knowing him to be the one in whom God is satisfied, and resting in that sufficiency that belongs to him and not us. That's what we're seeing here. It's the rest of the new creation. It's beholding the one who is and continually resting in that view. And that's why the gospel of the dispensation of spirit, or the dispensation of grace, is not go and do, is come and see. Come and see. Come and know the one. It's not come here and be instructed on how to become anything. It's come and see the one who has made unto you what you were never able to become, because you were not the man God intended to be it. The being of it existed way before any of this. It was defined before the foundation of the world. It is by the cross that we are brought into the victory, the excellence of this man who is exalted above all and given by God a name above all names. So we are not to look at man, including us, by, through the efforts of the law, through religious observations. We're not trying to get him or look to him to attain anything. We look at Jesus as God's satisfaction and intention fulfilled. And it reminds me of the call that Jesus gave to the religious leaders of his day, to the Jews as a whole, but to the leaders of the Jews specifically, a lot of the times, where he says, hey, come unto me, you who labor, toil, burdened by it, weary. He's talking about those laboring under the law, not on a 9-to-5 job, or, having to be around people you don't like. That's not the weary and heavy laden he's delivering you from. It's the weary and heavy laden of working under a law, or serving God under a system that never brought you to the end of its testimony. Now, it was to bring you to the end, but it could never produce in you the end it was intending or testifying of. As Galatians said, it couldn't give you the life of which it testified. Most of us think our toil and labor, right, applying it to yourself, the scriptures testify of Jesus, and we apply it to us. How do you get this rest? How do you come to this true Sabbath? Come to the man who fulfills his desire. Come to the one, and if we're in him, we're found in him. That's our state. I'm telling you where you are. I'm telling you the condition of your soul right now at present, if you are born of the Spirit of God. This is not something secondary. This is the moment you are born again condition of the soul. Jesus lives in you as the man of God's full intent. And that's the man we rest in beholding. We rest there, knowing that he is all in all. Now, Andrew Murray keeps on. I'm sorry. I apologize for reading these things, but I want to show you how easily we can vacillate when the core is not Jesus and only Jesus. When it's not singular. When we have all this other stuff that we've added to Jesus, all these other principles, all these other, dogmatic beliefs, theological additions. Listen to these words. But we see Jesus crowned with glory and honor. Again, this is Andrew Murray. Blessed the man who knows to look away from all that he finds in himself of imperfection and failure, to look up and behold all the perfection and glory that he is found in Jesus. Yes, blessed be the man who finds his delight and his life in meeting every disappointment and every difficulty with the blessed we see Jesus. Okay, now he gets in the situation. This is all I need. That satisfies the soul and gives it peace and joy and strength. Where was that, Andrew Murray, up here? Where he says that all of this, yes, is realized in Jesus, but it's just a down payment because it says, and it means that because it's in Jesus, it will one day be in and true of us too. Where's this Andrew Murray in all of that? Because most of that was very well stated and very good. But you can see in just a few sentences, and this was just right connected to what he said previous, you see the vacillation. And I guess that comes from some inner turmoil, some inner vacillation, but it's definitely theological vacillation. And, we see Jesus is everything God intended. But me too. You can't have it that way. So seeing Christ, beholding the one who is, and I know this is going to throw a monkey wrench in the whole works here, but if you take this seeing Jesus and take it back to 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and, um, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, being changed. This is the beholding of Jesus he's talking about. This is the seeing of a greater. This is the seeing of the better thing. This is the seeing it, receiving it, laying hold of it, and resting in it. That's what he's talking about. Not a secondary seeing of Jesus. Now, this seeing of Jesus continues and it carries on in the ongoing revelation of Christ in us. Absolutely. But this primary statement here is we are partakers of, we have received, and we have given full recognition that this Jesus is the man God was after. That's what he's talking about. Those of us who are born again, that's what we've done. We've received the man God always intended. And if that man is the one God always intended, meaning he is the righteous one, he's the perfect one, he's the holy one, then that leaves me understanding as well. I don't need law, ordinances, holy days, festivals, sacrifices, temples, high priests. Why? Because this man is everything. This man has done it all. In this man is summarized, and it basically the whole of the priesthood, the whole of the sacrifices and offering he's going to elaborate on in this chapter is taken up in these words, that he might taste death for all men. Yeah. We'll continue on that, but that's the truth. He is greater than the first man. He is the man intended, the ultimate man, unto whom God looks, of whom God testified, and in whom God has fully spoken. And this is why this man and the creation that is subjected to him, the heavens and the earth, the world, the age that is under his subjection, can never be shaken and never be removed, but will remain, as it says in the first chapter, and as we've been reading in the 12th chapter of Hebrews as well. This is found in a man, all of it. It's realized in him, not as a pattern for us, but as the perfection that God has provided to us. Now I'm going to read one more commentary. Joseph Benson. What is man? As the apostle had said, long space of time hath elapsed since the giving out of this testimony, and much longer since the creation of man. Yet all of these years, or rather all these ages, we see that that all things are very far from being put under this man's feet, from being subjected to the human race in general, or to any individual man, period. He said it hadn't happened corporately or just an individual having this happen. Hence, as if the apostle had added, we ourselves, by our own observation, may easily discern that these words of the psalmist respect not only or principally either the first man or his posterity, under whom certainly all things are not and never were put in subjection. But we see Jesus. That is, it is only in Jesus that the psalmist's testimony is verified. I agree with that. I agree with that. Now, let's go a little further. We're seeing in Hebrews 2 this, as I said previously, this wonderful setup for declaring Christ as the great high priest, even the once and for all sacrifice for sin, by whom the will of God has been fulfilled. And we'll read in a moment, in whom we are sanctified through that once and for all offering. Because he's bringing up sanctification here in a second, here in chapter 2, in this man. And as we proceed, we'll see the gathering together of all in him, who is the man of God's intent. So, Hebrews chapter 2, let's start verse 10. We're going to go through 13. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. The King James says are of one, all of one. All have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brethren or brothers, saying, I will tell your name in the midst of my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. Behold, and again, behold, I and the children God has given me. And we'll touch on each one of those if we get to that. Um, all right, so I want to talk about this, him not being ashamed to call them brethren. And these particular things that are said here. Why is that significant? Let me read a couple of verses first. Let me find it here. I'm going to skip over a couple of things, so I'm trying to figure out what to skip. I mean, there's multiple places here we could stay forever. Psalms 22, of course, is where the I declare your name to my brethren in the midst of the assembly. I will praise thee, and that's important. Again, we may not get much further than this, but it's important because to see where that chapter actually starts or how it starts. Because you see now this tasted death for all men being very significant to this. It begins with these familiar words that Jesus spoke on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? We're greeted with that as a messianic tie to this tasting of death and the glorious salvation that would follow that sacrifice. This is verses 2 through 5 of Psalms 22. My God, I call by day and thou answerest not, and by night and there is no silence to me, and thou art holy, sitting enthroned, the praise of Israel. In thee did our fathers trust. They trusted, and thou dost deliver them. Unto thee they cried, and were delivered. In thee they trusted, and were not ashamed. Now you'll notice we are let me turn there real quick. We're being introduced to a lot of the history of Israel here. The very first verse of this Psalm 22 is, why hast thou forsaken me, so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? And then what I just read from verse 2 to verse 5. They called on you, and you answered them. They trusted you, and in thee they trusted and were never ashamed. Why? Because you did what you said you would. You delivered them. So why is that important in this moment? Why is that important? And why is this what on the cross he says these words? Why? Because the history of Israel is being employed because Jesus on the cross here we're showing the true deliverance that would come in him. We're seeing this played out in Hebrews 2 in the coming of this perfect man. Verse 6 of Psalms 22. I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind, despised by the people. All who see me mock me, and they make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. You remember that being said about Jesus on the cross? In chapter 27 of Matthew, Verse 41, and in like manner also the chief priests mocking, and the scribes and elders said, others he saved. Himself he is not able to save. If he be the king of Israel, let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe him. He has trusted God. Let him now deliver him, if he wish him, because he said, I am the Son of God. See, in this, we're discovering the man of God's intention. We're seeing the man who fulfills the purpose of God and in whom God exercises his sovereignty over his new heaven and new earth, his kingdom that comes and never ends. And also in the place where he says, I will declare your name in the midst of my brethren, in the midst of the congregation, sing praises unto you. John 17, in the prayer of Jesus, what we call the high priestly prayer, verse 25, O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I have made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. Now, you can go on. I'm not going to go further in these verses, but there's Isaiah chapter 8, verses 13 through 18. You can go there and see this very same thing played out where the children whom the Lord hath given me. And the connection there is very important, but there's something I want to say before I close. We may come back to this, but remember, he says, this is from the Isaiah, the children that the Lord has given me. Notice that phrase. Notice what Jesus says in John chapter 6. But I say unto you that ye also have seen me and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me. That's the ones God gives to his Son. And they'll come to me. Him that comes to me, I'll in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do my will, but the will of him that sent me. See, this is the whole thing. This is Hebrews 2. This is the Jesus that we see, who's done and is what the first could not. This is the Father's will, verse 39 of John 6, which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me, again, the children God hath given me, I should lose nothing. But do what? Raise it up again in the last day. There's that raising up. There's the establishing of the second. There's that raising up of a house. He's sanctified with his own glory. This is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son. I think that's significant. Of we see Jesus, that everyone who seeth the Son, believing on him, may have everlasting life. And I will raise him up in the last day, the day of the Lord, this day we're in now. We're in that day that never ends, that eternal day. Why is all this significant? It's found in this phrase, he is not ashamed to call them brethren. This is not saying he's not ashamed of us now. He can put up with us. Thank God for his grace. Right? That's how we preach it. He should be ashamed of us, but he overlooks us. No, it's not how this works. So, let's consider it for a moment or two, and then we'll stop here. For this to be so, for such a relationship or a fellowship to exist, that those words could be uttered with regard to us in relation to him. This is the one exalted, right? This is the one glory and honor given to. And that one is not ashamed to call us brethren. Now, this is prefaced by him saying, he that sanctifies and those who are sanctified are one. They have one source. That's the reasoning. That's the reason he is not ashamed. But let's get there. But let's consider this phrase for a moment. For this to be so, and for that fellowship to exist, like he says it, there has to be a condition, a state, whereby his majesty and his perfection and his purity before God is not compromised or corrupted by bringing us into it, by bringing us into this in some relative way. That's not a good way to say it, but it's said. There has to be something of this fellowship that can't disregard, not that, that overcomes this, me, so that he stands solely as the identification of this type of fellowship. So he cannot be ashamed. And we're going to further clarify this contextually in some of the words of Jesus, but I want to show this in the example of a high priest and how God set this up and why he is not ashamed to call them brethren. It has to do with the singularity, the exclusivity that God has performed in him and provided to us all. It is the firstborn in many brethren. It is the one given to all, but the all still must recognize that they have nothing except what the one is made unto them. Because you'll notice, the one who sanctifies, they're of one source. And this is the security of our relationship. The one is why he is not ashamed to call us brethren. The many sons he has brought into the glory, into his glory, have one life. And this is why we are not to be encumbered with the guilt of the question any longer that Christianity has put upon men that weight forever and says, why are you mindful of me? Why are you still tolerating me? What must I do to be holy before you? When will your kindness finally be depleted toward me, seeing that I do not and cannot measure up? This, but we see Jesus, this, he is not ashamed to call them brethren, keeps us from being encumbered by such condemnation and such questions, because in him there is none of that. There is no condemnation in him. Why? Because he's made you perfect, Rabon? No, because he is the perfection that abides in Rabon, who is still an earthen vessel, but the treasure has been provided to it that God would recognize the treasure, and that treasure's power and the treasure's sufficiency would override the insignificance of the vessel. In Jesus, we see the one who is our sole, singular, only source of holiness, and we keep our gaze fixed upon him. And that's what the gospel should do. It keeps your gaze fixed upon the one that God provided to you. It says, turn and behold him. Turn and see the one that God sees. The one you received is the one your face, your soul should be locked on forever. Because that's the one God's gaze is locked on. And it doesn't move. And neither should yours or mine. So to get to the example, and then we'll stop, is Exodus 28. And I've read this several times, but Exodus 28, verse 35 through 38. It shall be upon Aaron to minister, and his sound shall be heard when he goes. This is when they put the pomegranates at the bottom of his garments. His sound shall be heard when he goeth in unto the holy place before the Lord, and when he comes out, that he dies not. So you'll know he's still kicking when you hear the bells a clinking, right? When you hear the pomegranates and the bells. Thou shalt make a plate of pure gold, engrave upon it like the engraving of a signet, holiness to the Lord. And you shall put it on a blue lace, that it may be upon the mitre, upon the forefront of the mitre it shall be, and it shall be on Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things which the children of Israel shall hallow in all their holy gifts. And it shall be always, listen to that, there's a perpetuity to this. There's a continuation here. It shall always be on his forehead, that they, the whole of the nation, the whole of the assembly, shall be accepted before the Lord. There's the one that defines everything, and there's why he's not ashamed to call them brethren. Because nothing of our shame, nothing of our deficiency, nothing of our corruption, nothing of us is brought into his fellowship. You determine nothing here. You can't take anything away from it. You certainly didn't add anything to it. The grace of God has ushered you into something that is not of you, but is solely of him. And when that is the truth of our state of being, as it is, there is nothing of us that he can look to and say, I cannot call you brethren. But there's a reason he says that statement is to bring in this transition from the old to the new. And again, we'll read that in the next class. But to me, this beautiful picture of the high priest stands there as the example of this. It's always on his head so that they may be accepted. Because nothing of the congregation is admissible into the holiest of all. Just this man who stands there for us, who stands there as my life. So none of that stuff that we look to and that causes us to make the question and have the condemnation of, what about me do you really like, God? And why are you still here? I wouldn't be. None of that can raise its ugly head to conflict with the sureness of the fellowship into which we have been called and brought by the grace of God. The fellowship of his Son is what it's called. It's the fellowship that belongs solely to the Son, and the grace of God has brought us into that Son, that we may be found in him, not having one thing of our own. Do you see? It is also the spirit of adoption. It is Romans chapter 8, also in Galatians chapter 4. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. And we're going to talk about that in Hebrews 2 as well. But you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. And now in Galatians 4, it is the that you might receive the adoption. I'm going to just read into it. Because you are sons, God has sent the spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you're no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir. It is his sonship that ensures our sonship, because he is the Son, the beloved Son, who lives in us. We don't have this independent. he that sanctifies. We're going to get into that in the next lesson, I promise. Then those who are sanctified are of one. English Standard Version, have one source, are of one source. Well, he's the source. He's the source. And that, to me, is why it is so important for us to understand the significance of the simplicity of Christ, to always focus there, to not complicate the matter and try to add to Jesus anything whatsoever. The simplicity of Jesus is what secures everything. Otherwise, there is no certainty. Because when you take away the one and you try to add something else, you have brought chaos in your own mind, not in God's. He's not a fool. We are. You've brought chaos into a place where there is none. That is why the gospel points you to the man. That is why we've received the man that God intended from the beginning. It's one man's obedience. We are made righteous. There's the man. There's the one we see. There's the one we've received. There's the one we must continue to gaze upon. Not so we can assimilate to his identity or reflect his morality, but so that we can be found in him securely and restfully, boasting only in what he and he alone has made unto us. So, with that being said, we'll stop. And I really appreciate you guys being on. Sorry, this is taking me a little time to get through, but I think it's important that we say these things. I think it's important that, at least it's important to me, that I get this out and say these things. The body of Christ needs to hear Jesus. We need to stop trying to imitate, but just be assured by the preaching of the truth and by the seeing of him that he is our sufficiency. So thank you guys so much for your continued support in whatever way you do. Just being on here, I thank you so much. Lisa, Rosella, Bob, thanks. Bill, I know you're on. And everybody that was on that I didn't know. I'm hoping and praying that these things are a blessing. I really do. I your feedback is all I get. So please feel free to give me whatever. Thank you. Thank you, Rosella. Muy liberado. I think that means liberating, freeing. I know Pig Latin. That's all. Thank you. But honestly, this is something that I take very seriously, and I look at it as a great responsibility. Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you guys being on this journey with me. Oh, Rob, okay. Rob is on too. Thank you, Rob, for being on. Hopefully at some point in time, we'd all be able to see one another. That's one of the things I hoped, in person, not just video, but that we could just sit down with one another, have a cup of coffee, and just talk. Some of us, luckily, are able to do that from time to time. But man, I'd love to be able to do that with all of you. But anyway, wishes aside, love you guys. Thanks again for being on. And now the 26th of May is going to be the next lesson. I'm putting that tentatively. My wife and I are actually going on a trip. We're going on a cruise for the first time in our lives. She's always wanted to do that, and we finally are going to do it. And so we'll be driving in on I think the 23rd or somewhere around there from Miami. I'm driving to Miami, so I'll be driving back on that day. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll go from there. But I'll let you guys know if anything changes. Right now, we'll just set it up for the 26th of May, and I'll let you know if anything changes on that. So love you guys. Thanks again. I'll finally end it this time. Promise you.